Welcome. My name is Peter Levy, and I am a proud partner of the law firm of Mandelbaum Barrett. Before we begin today, I just want to thank Mark Murphy for the cut in interest rates today. When anything good happens financially, I attribute it to Mark. So,
my mother does too.
On behalf of our esteemed panel here tonight, I'm honored to greet all of you. I'm really thrilled to be a part of this event. We've done this now, I'm thinking 7 or 8 years. The panel before you, they're exceptionally smart, they're very talented, but most importantly, they're going to be very candid with you. And that's important because this is your program. This is not your traditional seminar with PowerPoints and charts. We don't use them. Instead, after a couple of introductory words, we're going to pass the microphone around. And these talented men would like to hear your questions, your thoughts on what you want to know about protecting your business, your current business, and how to position your business for a liquidity event or potential exit. So think about your questions. We welcome them and we encourage them. As business owners, as entrepreneurs, you're really a different breed. You are the lifeblood of American industry. And I just want to share with you a quick story about my 83-year-old father-in-law, Joe. So Joe immigrated to the United States in 1980 from Ukraine. Couldn't speak English, couldn't write English, doesn't know how to turn on a computer. Came here with the shirt on his back and a belief in the American dream and hard work, and came here and worked 3 jobs, 18, 19 hours a day. One of those jobs was as a janitor in a strip mall. By 1987, he owned a jewelry store in that strip mall. By 1993, he owned the strip mall. And while that's a wonderful story, what I want to tell you about is something that happened that I witnessed with Joe in a Walmart in Sinking Springs, Pennsylvania. A young Walmart associate had just come into the jewelry aisle and placed this giant barrel of watches. $9 a watch. 500 assorted watches in this barrel. And we're not talking about Rolex or Patek Philippe. These are $9 watches. And Joe says to the kid in the blue Walmart vest, "How much if I buy the whole barrel?" And the kid looks at him and says, "It's $9 a watch, sir." So Joe says, "I want to speak to the manager." So the manager comes over and Joe says, "I want to buy this whole barrel of watches. I've got $2,000 in cash." And he does buy it, right there in the Walmart aisle, cash. Now, I don't know what portion of that $2,000 ever made it to the cash register. That can be discussed at either our tax seminar or our white-collar crime seminar. I don't know which one. But the kid brought the 500 watches to the trunk of Joe's car. And I was kind of impressed, because my father-in-law had just, these watches retailed for $4,500. He just spent $2,000. I said, "It's pretty good." But I don't know a damn thing, because I thought he bought 500 watches. But he didn't buy 500 watches. What Joe bought was 500 leather straps and 500 watch batteries. And what he did is he put them in the jewelry store, and he also set up a booth at the Meadowlands Flea Market. And he sold the leather bands for $10 a band, and he sold the watch batteries for $5 each. And he made a $6,500 profit on his $2,000 investment. So as business owners, you think differently. You see the world differently. Every day is not a job, it's an opportunity. Every deal is a springboard to success, and every person you speak to is a new chance to learn. In 1995, when Jeff Bezos started Amazon, he was with his first small group of employees, and they are working on the floor tirelessly, breaking their backs, hurting their knees, packing boxes. And he says, this is not working. I'm getting everybody knee pads. And the employee sitting next to him says, Jeff, why don't we just get tables and then we can stand up and do this? And he listened, he learned, and you know where that all ended up. So it's good to listen. So as I said to you, tonight we have an all-pro lineup. I'm really proud to be standing up here with these gentlemen. Normally speaking, I would give their bios and read all their tremendous credentials. And at the Mandelbaum-Barrett table in the back, we have their full biographies. And I encourage you to grab one after the presentation. But what I'd like to do tonight instead is we're going to go down the line, and I'm going to let each one of our panelists tell you a little bit about themselves.
Thanks, Peter, and thanks for the nice introduction, the great story. Thank you all for coming tonight. My name is Bill Barrett. I'm the managing partner of Mandelbaum Barrett, and I've been working on mergers and acquisitions transactions for privately held, closely held businesses for 26 years. And during that time frame, I've done or participated in over 1,000 business transactions, buying or selling companies. Focusing on entrepreneurs and closely held companies is what I've done for my entire career. Pass it to Mark.
I'm Mark Murphy, CEO of Northeast Private Client Group. I think when you give your own bio, it reminds me of one of my favorite expressions. You're either humble or you're about to be. But I am a key business strategist, critical thinker, and financial advisor to entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial thinking people.
Hi, thank you for having me tonight. My name is Mark Truella. I am the owner of Best Way Trucking out of Fairfield, New Jersey. I have just recently been acquired as of January. We've had a heck of a run at it. My dad started the business back in 1975 out of the basement of our house. We've grown it today into 240,000 square feet, 35 vehicles, 50 employees. So it's been a nice run. We've been around since 1975.
Hi everyone, Stephen Goldberg. I'm the managing partner of Sun Mergers and Acquisitions and Sun Business Valuations. Sun Merger and Acquisitions, where we are a lower middle market sell side merger and acquisition firm where we help business owners who are looking for an exit strategy to effectuate the sale of their company. We've been involved in over 225 transactions over the past 25 years, as we just celebrated our 25-year anniversary. We have Sun Business Valuations, where we established 24 years ago, geared towards doing business valuations for companies for estate planning, as well as transaction, shareholder matters, and all kinds of transaction purposes as well. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Bill. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Steve, for having me. So I'm Dave Roth. I am the CEO of RBB, which is an accounting firm based in Somerset, New Jersey. I do a lot of merger and acquisition work, but kind of interesting is I'm here to tell my story about how we sold part of our business last August, and how I've always helped people do merger and acquisition work and decided it was time for the accounting firm to do it. And we were acquired by a private equity group, and it's been quite a run since we've been acquired. We've tripled our business. So I'll tell you my story and any questions you may have. I have two of my partners here, so they might have a different story, but this is mine.
So,
Fact checkers.
before we reach out to you and get your insight, you can ask some questions. Just wanted to ask Steve Goldberg, if you could sort of talk a little bit about the current economic environment and where we're at.
Thanks, Peter. It's been what I would say a very robust M&A environment over the last year, and it doesn't happen all the time. In fact, the last 2 years prior to this, we found that the market was somewhat tight, mainly due to issues with financing. Finances and banks were very skittish, and it was causing a lot of transactions that should have gotten done not to get done. This year, things have changed. Banks are much more willing to participate in transactions. We do recognize that there's more. We see that there's more equity involved on the buyer's side than in the past. But I'm talking about both traditional lenders, and SBA has been a very big part of smaller transactions too, and their requirements have become a lot less stringent. We're also finding that I think, since COVID, people are getting much more comfortable acquiring companies from other parts of the country. Therefore, it's opening up the buyer pool, and we are seeing more interest per engagement that we handle than really in a long time. So whenever you have more interested parties, it's a key thing, because when a seller can have multiple opportunities to look, multiple options to choose from, it makes a very, very big difference. Still continue to see situations where sellers tend to have value expectations that are somewhat high compared to the market or compared to what buyers are willing to pay. As such, we are, and because of that, and because of there being more sellers selling at younger ages now, we're seeing different types of deal structures that are continuing to evolve. Deal structures that include either earnouts, which are transactions that are contingent upon some future benchmarks to be hit, or retained equity, which allows the parties, the buyer and the seller, to bridge their differences through much more creative means, such as an earnout or retaining some equity. And it also is a great tool for a buyer because it ensures that the seller will remain engaged post-closing to help continue to grow the company. So we are seeing a good amount of activity in the M&A space, and I think I've covered most of the points I wanted to cover. So let me turn it back to you, Peter.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
So do I have a interested, inquisitive, or brave volunteer who would like to kick us off with a question? While you're thinking, if not, I'm going to ask the first question. Bill, in your experience, what are the most common mistakes a business owner makes in kind of planning the sale of their business?
Thanks, Peter. So I think that from my perspective, when I see business owners make a mistake, it's the failure to prepare for a transaction. It's, I always tell my clients to, in essence, start a due diligence process on yourself before you're ready to go to the market. There's a number of things to look at, and one of the things I do sometimes, I'll actually take a due diligence checklist that a typical buyer would require in a transaction, and I'll sit down with my clients and go over it to see, can we even produce the material on the list? Does it even exist? Do we have the types of agreements that they're looking for? Do we have policies? Are we following rules? For example, are we abiding by the labor and employment rules? Are we classifying employees properly? In essence, try to go and audit how someone is conducting their business before they even go to market. And in certain types of businesses too, some of the advantages of owning a closely held business is the tax advantages that come along with it. And depending on how aggressive someone may have been, you start looking at the financial aspect and whether or not the books and records need to be cleaned up for a period of time before you're ready to go to the marketplace. So I think it's really about a planning process. One time I go through my typical process with a client, and I said, I want to run searches on you and the business, before we move forward. And my client looked at me like, searches? Why do I have to do searches on myself? And so we ran through and did searches, and we actually found some judgments that he didn't even know he had on himself that we then had to go deal with. So it's really about preparation in advance and getting ready to go to the marketplace, because the scrutiny that you're going to come over from a buyer, especially the more sophisticated buyer. So for example, if you happen to be a target for a private equity transaction, they're going to do very extensive due diligence, and you really have to make sure you go into that transaction prepared.
Thank you, Bill.
I just want to add one more.
Sure.
So from my perspective, and Bill makes a great point about preparation, I'm looking at things more right towards the sale process when they're ready. I find it's very important for a seller to get a realistic understanding as to what's realistically achievable in terms of valuation, likely deal structure, tax implications. It's amazing how many people are unrealistic and they're leading with their chin in a sense. When I think it's important to recognize that what your goals are realistic with the marketplace. Another one I commonly see is when a seller gets approached by one party, which inevitably happens, as people all out there all the time looking, I'm sure many sellers here get those emails, and they get involved with one, and they fall in love with one particular party. And they end up spending 4, 5, 6 months with this one party. The party knows they're the only game in town. As opposed to if you've been involved in more of an organized process, to have 6 or 7 or 8 prospective acquirers presenting offers in the form of letters of intent and having options to choose from, having more negotiating leverage, I think is very, very important. The other thing that's important is to get the proper advisors because, listen, this is the biggest transaction in one's life. It's usually a once-in-a-lifetime transaction, so I think that's very important. So I just wanted to mention those. I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, and before we go to questions, I would be remiss if I didn't ask our 2 business owners who recently had sales to speak a little bit about their own stories and journeys. Mark, would you like to give us a little bit of your own journey?
Sure. So just a little bit more about the company was, given the fact that it was a family business, moving towards looking at selling the business was a very, very personal thing. I mean, certainly it's a financial thing, it's a personal thing, but as a family business, there were a lot more dynamics. My dad had passed away already 12 years ago. My mom is alive. So there were those dynamics of family members still working in the business. And everything Bill and Steve just said is spot on. I wouldn't say that I made mistakes. I would say that I didn't know what to expect. Obviously, I'd never sold a business before. And they would give me the advice. Working with Stephen and Son couldn't have been better because they were realistic with me. I had these ideals in my head and how I wanted to go, and they said, buckle in for due diligence. You're never going to experience anything like it in your life. And I was like, I own my own business. I've been working this for years. And then due diligence came along, and man. And we were a very quick close. Our acquisition, the people who acquired us wanted to close before the end of the year. We didn't go into LOI till October. So everything moved very, very quickly. And I also, it's almost like you're putting your business on hold. Sales, people, and I didn't expect that. And there were a lot of great things that happened, but it was a lot of work. So much to what Bill just said, being prepared, I was not prepared, only because I didn't know what to expect. And again, having a great team. I looked at a couple other merger and acquisition companies, and I ultimately went with Steve because of what he had to offer. And it was the right move, because those giant companies out there, they're selling you on the internet, and they're calling you all the time, and it wasn't necessarily a good fit for me. So January we closed, and it was only, we were in business we were together for about a year and a half. It took a while. So we were together for about a year and a half, and I had people come to me, but again, a very personal thing for me. I wanted the business to be around. I wasn't looking to have somebody acquire me and have them flip it in 4 years, growing in another 3 or 4 million in revenue, and then they flip it and sell it to someone else, and my staff goes away. I feel very strongly about my staff. We're like a family, and I have some young people working for me, and they have a future there. So they found the right fit for me, and it's been very good since. I've only been involved for 8 months. They did not put anybody in my company. Like, we had one company that was a whole family of brothers, cousins, and everybody, and I'm like, no, there's no way I'm going to be running myself through this guy's brother. So this company, they're from Denver, Colorado. They put nobody with me. I have what we call an operations manager. We oversee, every week we have a meeting. He flies out maybe once a month, and I'm moving in a great direction. I got to a point in my business where I knew, I was smart enough to know to get to that next level. I didn't know if I wanted to do it. A little worn out. I've been in the business since I had a license, driving for my father. And if it was even worth it to put that effort in and to have the know-how to go to that next level, and they're offering me all that. We're really transitioning well with putting people in place and hiring the right people. So from my perspective, it's going very well. It's still a lot of work. I joked with my wife the other day, stating I think I'm working more hours and putting in more time now for less money, but but it's going well. That's about all I can say right now.
There's a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Are you an employee-based trucking company?
Yes.
Or ICs?
Employee-based.
May I ask what kind of products you were delivering?
Yes, we're
I'm
more.
also in the transportation industry, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, we handle a lot of construction material, which is where our growth came from over the past 10 years. We filled a niche of rush same-day deliveries, and we expanded into the warehousing from that because of the materials, especially in New York City. They didn't have the footprint to have this product sit on a job site and get stolen, and we just proved our concept to all of our clients of how it works, managing their product and deliveries on time, and making the two forces come together. And we went from 10,000 square feet of warehousing into 240,000 square feet today.
David, why don't you take a couple of minutes and tell us about your own experience?
So, my experience is a little different, except for the hard work and working harder after to come with the territory. But
Soft-spoken.
okay, I'll pick it up.
That's better.
All right. So, mine's a little different. As opposed to a family business, at a service business, I have 10 other partners, and trying to get 11 people to agree on something is not as easy as you might think. But so we've been approached by other accounting firms once a year. What do you think? And none of us really wanted to do it. Our age group is from 65 to 33, right? So everybody has a different idea of what they want to do and what they want to accomplish. But we've always wanted to be entrepreneurial. Like I said, I do a lot of merger and acquisition, and I've been doing that for the last 35 years. So we were looking for something special, and we were introduced to a private equity group, and they came in to the office, and there were 3 people under the age of 32, looked like Keanu Reeves. I'm like, is this for real? But the last 3 businesses they sold for an aggregate of $2 billion. I'm like, all right, that got my attention, right? That makes some sense to me. So what their vision was is to acquire and merge in and grow smaller accounting firms. You know, there's a few private equity firms that are doing 100 million, 200 million. There was just one that was sold for $2 billion. But at 19 million, I'm like, you know what, this could be interesting, and this can also be something different in the profession and where we can make a mark. I felt like we've done a lot in this profession, but this would make something different. So they came in, gave their presentation, they left, and I looked at all my partners, which I said 2 of them are here. One's on the older side and one's on the younger side, and we were all in agreement. It might be the first time ever that we all said, let's pursue this. And so from a due diligence point of view, it was pretty easy because that's what we do as an accounting firm. So that part was easy. I knew our books were good. Tax structure's not an issue because that's what we do. So mainly it was negotiating the terms and the price. And as an accounting firm, how it works traditionally is when a partner retires, they get paid out over 10 years and et cetera, et cetera. So we sold 60% of our business and everybody got more than they would have if they retired and waited without waiting the 10 years. Plus we still own 40% of the business. So we rolled over 40, which you're talking about rollover. Yeah. We talked about earn-out. We hit our earn-out. We crushed it, so we got on top of that. So that part's been great. These, my private equity partners have done everything they needed. They built the back office. They built outsourcing. They put an in-house counsel. They've changed our IT. All the things, all the I hate to say bluntly, but all the crap you don't want to do as a business owner, they took care of. So all we had to do was service, sell, and bring in more. So that was tremendous. And so what their concept is to do regional platforms. So we're the Eastern platform. So right now, we're up to 50 million. We were doing 19. And the group's at 200 million with a $65 million EBITDA in a year. So I have a feeling the second bite of the apple could be more lucrative than the first. So, you know, it's not without hard work. It's not without some pains, but I think I'm pretty happy with that one. So.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks. Anybody have any questions for?
Peter, I was just going to make a comment. I was reading a study coming over here on I was reading a study on my phone coming over here today. It was on the internet, so we know it must be true. But they were talking that in 1974 they were saying that only 5% of the world are entrepreneurs. And I'm in a room with fellow entrepreneurs. They did that in 1974. Almost 50 years later, there's been another study done. Does anyone want to guess what percentage of people are entrepreneurs 50 years later? 5%. Really? It never changes. It's always 5% of us in the room that are entrepreneurs, but there's enough of us to change the world. And I said, we were talking about with Peter with mistakes, is, you know, one of my favorite Robert Byrne quotes is, he says that the purpose of life is a life of purpose. And I also think, and I find that most of my entrepreneurial clients, when they're running their businesses, they have great purpose in their life. And they're in great momentum and great purpose. And I think that one of the things I love to say is that in life there are no finish lines, there's only milestones. And selling your business is a milestone, it's not a finish line. And whether you sell your business or not, it's not good enough just to create multi-generational wealth. You also have to create a life by design. And what I mean by that is when you talk to an entrepreneur, they'll say, tell me about your work-life balance. And when you talk to an entrepreneur, entrepreneurs don't have work-life balances. They go from something they love to something they love more than that to something they love more than that. And so they create a life they never have to retire from, much less ever take a vacation from, because they're always doing something that they love. And I think that, you know, Peter, to you, that the mistake that I think gets made is the shock of the preparation is that so many people, if they're not prepared psychologically on that end, not just financially, which we spend so much time with, but also psychologically. You know, I live in Palm Beach half the winter, and our neighbors and friends and clients have lots of money there. But I mean, you got a lot of people who, you know, either muttering, you know, at the dry cleaner, you know, I used to have 10,000 people report to me, and you know, now I make dinner reservations and, you know, go to the dry cleaners. And so it's still about purpose, because that's what's made you all so special. And it's just another milestone. There's a question back there.
Question in the back.
Make it easy, I'm tired.
No hard questions.
I have two questions, and actually they're both two ends of the spectrum. So one has to do with the people up front who make a transaction, but yet they're still heavily actively involved, and also still seems like an equity partner. So can you talk a little bit about like ideal structures of some of the deals in which, right, as a seller, you still have some equity structure, you're still involved if you choose to be, versus the traditional, I'm out, I'm done, I'm sold, give me my money, let's move on.
Yeah, in my case, I still have equity in the company as well, 16%. I have an earnout that I have to do over the next, that I'd like to do over the next 3 years. And I also got, you know, a nice amount of money at the sale. So I have a 3-year work deal. So that was my deal plan. And to accomplish that for my business, I think if I wasn't part of the transition, the business would suffer rather than grow. Because like many entrepreneurs, we're like the heart of the business. And if I wasn't there, we would lose a certain customer base. I would lose employees. It wouldn't be good. And the company that acquired us certainly knows that. They've done a bunch of business deals. So I think in my case and many others, it's just part of the business itself. And as far as how hard I work now, it's because of the transition, looking towards that 3-year goal of somebody else being the CEO, not me. And like I said, in my case, I was so concentrated on growing the business over the last 10 years, there were a lot of things that crap, as we called it, I didn't want to deal with, like I was just growing the business and, protocol put in place, OSHA safety rules put in place, it needed a lot of work, and that's happening now. The right managers being put in place to do the right job, so everybody's not coming to me. My job before was everything, and I needed to transition from that so that the company can be successful for many years to come. And like I said, it's very difficult. There's a lot, we had one, it was Best Way Trucking Incorporated, and when they acquired us, of course, they didn't want the legal liability of any baggage that might have come along with me, any lawsuits or anything from the past, so it's now Best Way Trucking LLC. Well, you got to change your legal name. I got motor vehicle stuff to change. Well, everything that you're involved with has to change, so it's a lot of work. I'm paying bills, and I'm like, well, this bill still reads the old company. We got to, change the name on this. To this day, right now, I'm dealing with motor vehicles, so we don't have to change all of our registrations, which would be very costly. We have 40 vehicles. So those type of things that come up, it's everything involved in emails and so as far as that, and that's why I'm working harder and still growing the business. I'm back to doing my job in sales and giving myself the option when the transition happens to a new CEO, I want to be in a place to still, and invite me from the new company to have a place there, whether it's sales manager. I have 2 people under me doing sales with me because I really enjoy sales and that's what I'm really good at. To have that position for me down the road, or I find something else to do and my passion for something else. But I do love the business, and that was a part of the personal side of selling this. I needed it to be right. I wanted my employees to be right, and I needed it to be right for me. It was a family decision. My wife, who, God bless her, when we started this, when I took over the business after my dad died, we were not financially sound at all. We took a second mortgage out on the house. So, the whole process of owning the business now, since my dad's passing, it's been a very personal family thing. So it was not just my decision. It involved the whole family and our stability for the future. And, it was the right move. But the hard work now will get me to the end point of the 3 years.
After 3 years, we can still retain 60% ownership of the entity?
Yes. My deal structure is I have a put option after 4 years, which was thank goodness, I had very, very good lawyers. Anybody that's looking to go through this process, lawyers and your merger person they were the most important things for me because I didn't know anything. I'd never done this before.
And your wife.
And my wife. And my accountant as well. Yeah, I mean, really, I should mention Mark as well.
Dave, you said lawyer first.
The lawyer is key, and everybody else falls into it. But it was a very big part. There are things, and I got a specialist lawyer in this field, and without that, there would have been things like I didn't have the option to sell my stock. And I always said, if I'm not part of the business, my stock, I'm out. I don't need my option in there because if I'm not controlling it, because I'm a control freak, I'm an entrepreneur, I don't want my money in that. I'll invest it somewhere else. So yeah, that we structured that after 4 years, I have a put option.
I will tell you that many transactions, it is a requirement for the seller to keep their equity in the transaction until it's a secondary transaction, many times 5 to 7 years down the road. And it's usually a very, very good investment. I know a lot of business owners have gotten very, very wealthy on that second piece. So it varies, but that many times you were fortunate to get a put option, but a lot of people don't.
And it doesn't mean I'm going to take it.
Right.
If I see the right direction in the company, why not? Good investment. We're growing.
Yeah, and less you see all cash deals and closely held company businesses.
Follow up on one thing.
Sure.
So was the company that acquired it in the industry, or is it just a financial investment?
Just a financial investment. In fact, they're from Denver, Colorado. We were their first East Coast acquisition. And most of the other companies they've acquired were in landscaping, land moving equipment, concrete companies, nothing to do with trucking. So first logistics industry and first East Coast acquisition.
I was just going to say, in terms of all cash transactions, you see that less and less in closely held businesses, except sometimes when you have a strategic, where it's a company that does exactly what you do, except they're a lot bigger than you, and they've got all the necessary people and the leadership, and you have more of an opportunity there for either an all or mostly cash deal. But a lot of times the investors, private equity groups, you're going to hold a good amount of equity and usually sign on for an extended employment agreement to transition that business over a few years.
Actually, two questions. What is the primary driver? Is it EBITDA, or is it revenue, or does it depend on the industry? That's the first question.
EBITDA revenue, or does it depend on what?
EBITDA revenue, or does it depend on the industry? And
Okay.
The buyers.
Yeah. So in any event, people tell me, ask me all the time, I'm doing about 20 million in revenue, what do you think my business is worth? And there are companies out there, you could have two companies, one company doing 20 million in revenue, they may be making 5% profit, or the shareholders are pulling out salaries and there's not much beyond that. Or you could have a company doing 12 million in revenue, they're bringing $3 million of EBITDA to the bottom line, much better run company. And so the answer is really, revenue is cocktail party conversation. Most valuation is driven off EBITDA and also the risk factor. What's the probability, what's the likelihood that those earnings are going to continue going forward? In other words, is there any uncertainty? Is there any legislation the company's up against? Is there one big customer or two big customers that the company can lose, where now it can change overnight? Are there no contracts, or is it a very project-oriented business? So, as opposed to more of a recurring, repeat revenue business. So it's the characteristics of the business, as well as the earnings of the company, and the likely future earnings of the company that people anticipate. But I know they look at one of the things.
So the accounting world in the past was always worth 1 times revenue. That's all you heard for like 20 years. Now with this private equity model, it's based on EBITDA. And we got close to 2 times revenue, so I like the EBITDA model better. And to answer your question, we rolled over 40%. We still have like $14 million into the deal. And for me, the fun of the whole thing is, I feel like I'm a hair club president too, because whenever they're going to talk to an accounting firm to purchase, I get to talk to them and tell them about our experience. So for me, besides doing what we're doing, it's kind of fun to do that. I'm going to California this week for a party that Peter over there is going to the same party. And there's two firms that I'm meeting with out there, so it's a good way to make it a business expense. And by the way, Bill, here's a little plug. You guys did a great job as the lawyers in our transaction, so thank you.
Thanks. I'll take it.
One of the things I was going to say, Peter, is that sometimes you just can't look at the shiny number, because you look at a number like the top line number. One of the famous cases we did was when I sold Darrell Hall and John Oates music catalog tax-free. It was front page of the Wall Street Journal when it was done. And I think you have to not only look at what the shiny number is, but also how many years in it, what's the salary you're going to work back at, and figure that into the deal, because it's likely going to be a lot less than you're earning on a current basis. And in addition, you've got to figure out what's the tax ramifications of it as well. And I would also say there's really only 2 asset classes. We know there's dozens. And for our purposes, we call them paychecks, or either free capital or play checks. And so I think when you do retire, you've got to set up a series of assets that will give you either a guaranteed or a highly reliable stream of income to replace your income in your business. And I'll call those paychecks. But you also want another series of assets where you can spend it, you can save it, you can give it away. But the important thing is it's not responsible for producing income for your family. So if you have both paychecks and playchecks, that's financial freedom. But there's still one more level. Even if you sold your business for $1 quadrillion, over the long term, it starts to look like fixed income. So how do you then have what's the equivalent of earned income in perpetuity? And for many of you that have children or grandchildren in the business, is this the opportunity to now finally have the liquidity to start your own family office so that you could start the next sprouting of multi-generational wealth? Do it not like the way the Vanderbilts did it, do it like the way the Rockefellers did, where they kept that family money together and doubled down and built it, while the Rockefellers are still enormously wealthy. The Vanderbilts did it the opposite way, and although they still have a very famous name, they don't have the famous wealth.
I just wanted to add one thing on, Steve touched a little bit on how you can really lose valuation, and he touched on concentration. We talked about having one or two big clients, and it always reminds me, I had a client for a number of years that had a business doing 30 million of top line revenue, very nice EBITDA, they were doing very well. 70% of their business was through Costco, and they could not get a buyer for that business except for an earnout. But the way the earnout was, it was like, well, if we're able to just keep the business for another 5 years, we'll make way more than the purchase price, because it wouldn't write a check for it. And ultimately, even after going to market and everything else, that huge concentration killed their ability to have a liquidity event.
Thank you. My second question is, my understanding is that the standard thinking is that prepping to a sale is a 2 to 3 year process. Is that accurate, or do you have some other responses?
I'll be quick. Okay, Dave, go, you guys take it.
I'll just be quick.
For me, it wasn't 2 to 3 years. It was it was a couple months. Like I said, we went into LOI in October. We closed by January 1st. So, again, only because of my accounting team and Sun Merger and other people, the lawyers, we put it together. But had I been mentally prepared for it, yes, I was on the market for a year and a half. But as far as the books and the due diligence, no, I was very unprepared.
But those 2 months were hell.
Oh, yes, they were.
Yes.
Let's talk about my clients, and then we'll talk about us. Most of the clients that have been engaged in a transaction over the last 5 years, they thought about it for a while, but the time frame to go to market is quicker than 2 to 3 years. It doesn't have to be that long. Just have to be prepared from an accounting point of view, and prepared mentally, and have the right people around you. And just, as Bill said, the preparation on that case study you did is a great way to be there. In our case, it was a 4-month transaction and we were done, but we were ready. So I think once you're ready, and you just have to find the proper deal and the proper buyer and the proper structure, and as Mark said, terms are just as important, if not more. So
generally, from the time, if you look at it on a more immediate basis, when people approach us, they want to sell, they've been thinking about selling, they're ready to go. It takes us usually about 60 days or so to really make sure we get all the ducks in a row. So we have the financials presented in the right way. We prepare what you call a confidential informational memorandum, which really tells the story of the company in a very confidential yet effective way. We research target lists of either investment groups, strategic acquirers, and so that on a more immediate basis, from the time that you decide to pull a trigger, let's say hire a firm like ours, you can expect about 60 days or so of preparation before we really go into having active discussions. There may be some, but of course, the longer you prepare ahead of time, the more you can address potential concentration issues where you're dependent on one employee, or the owner is too dependent on the owner, and things like that take longer to address. And it's helpful to recognize what might need to be done.
Do you specialize in any particular kind of business, or all business?
mostly business to business, services, business services, distribution, manufacturing. We decided a long time ago not to specialize in any one sector, because the skill sets that we bring to the table can be just like Bill will tell you in his business. You know, you don't have to specialize in any one sector. As long as you understand the whole transaction process. And we generally look to handle transactions. Our niche is that we found that there were a lot of business brokers that handle more mom and pop transactions. They take somewhat of an unsophisticated approach to the process. On the other side, there are these large investment banking firms doing the $100 million, $500 million, $1 billion transactions. And our niche has been to really handle the sale of lower middle market companies, typically companies that sell for in a range of anywhere from, let's say, 3 to 5 million on the lower end to 50 to 75 million towards the higher end, is where 80-85% of our transactions fall.
We've got a question over here.
Let's say we reach the point volume-wise, 100 million, whatever it is, where you think you might be attractive to a private equity company. We're in the medical business. Do you look for a private equity firm that specializes strictly in medical, or do you? I mean, if you ask for if you go out and look for somebody, you can get less than if they come looking for you. So you have to find somebody to go look for them for you.
Yeah, and we've done some transactions in the healthcare industry, and through that, we've built a large database of equity groups that actually specialize or focus in healthcare. And it does help when they understand the business, because the due diligence process becomes a lot easier. They know what they're looking for. They don't have to relearn an industry. So you will find in more and more a lot of these groups, you get to know the types of platforms or types of add-ons that they're looking for. A platform is when you're a company like Mark was a platform because he was the first of his type in that group. And an add-on is many times they may now look to add on different smaller acquisitions to help propel the growth going forward. But it does help if the equity group understands the business and has expertise in the business.
So how do you find those equity groups?
Well, we have, for example, in our situation, we have over 4,000 in our database where we track what they're looking for, what types of sectors they've been in. And there's also certain databases that we subscribe to that help us identify equity groups that are involved in certain types of sectors.
Just want to go back to your question. We recently had went through a process and recently sold our family business, very similar to your trucking business. And I think what you were asking, because we missed a vote on this, was the 2 to 3 year preparation. We were getting emails and outreach from private equity, and we said, let's listen. And, you know, we didn't realize what the company was worth. We're in business 20 years, started from zero. And when we heard the numbers, we said, wow, let's look harder at this. I'm on the downside, I'm 60 years old. I said, let's start, while this market's hot, let's look at it. What we didn't do was, we weren't prepared. When private equity came in, they looked back 3 years, right? And 3 years was not great because of circumstances, family business, different expenses went through the business. We didn't prepare prior, so I don't know if that's the same question that you're asking, but if we were to do things differently, I think we would have hired a firm, we got educated like we're doing tonight here, which we never did. We just heard a number. We did better than that number, we did great, but I think to what you guys are saying, preparation beforehand, super important. You're going to get paid a multiple on every dollar that is falling through. So if I make a suggestion, it's just be prepared.
And another related point that I can make a suggestion is not only preparation, but it's so critical to keep, as a seller, to keep your eye on the ball during that process. You don't want to get so distracted with the process and where you're taking your eye off the ball and all of a sudden sales are down 20% or with something, or earnings are down. Because even though you had 4 or 5 years of good earnings, if the current earnings are down, people are going to think that there's other things behind it. So very important to keep your eye on the ball during that process. I know with Mark, we were talking every month, what's your numbers look like, and try to keep them really focused on that, because it's critical.
Yeah. Steve, can you pass it I think it's also important because keeping your eye on the ball, because sometimes deals don't get done for whatever reason, and buyers back out. And I've seen clients who they could so feel and taste that their deal was going to happen that they started dropping the ball. And I've seen two things happen. One, it doesn't go forward and now they've got to kind of fix things up. Or because they're dropping the ball and the buyer continues to analyze its diligence right to the last minute and they see some trends they don't like, it could impact that valuation.
During our process, it was about 4 or 5 months, and they just kept looking at TTM.
Right.
Now it was trailing 12, and then next month. And if you weren't trending the right way, there was some doubt.
Which brings me to the final comment I had on that, which is I'm a believer in part of that preparation for the right size business in doing a sales side quality of earnings in advance of your transaction. Because the buyer is going to do that study, that analysis, and look at your trailing 12-month EBITDA and look at the historical. I like to go into those negotiations knowing all those numbers, with all the add backs, with all the fair market value adjustments, as opposed to reacting to what gets thrown at you. I like going into it knowing all those numbers in advance, but really knowing it, not just saying we think this is our EBITDA, which a lot of entrepreneurs will do. Oh, well, we're pretty sure it's this. No, like actually do a sales side Q of E. So.
I was going to just add to that, Bill. I was just going to say, I know we've been in transactions where somebody was offering like an 8x multiple, and we took the 4.5 multiple because they said the EBITDA at the 4.5 was so much higher. One group did the analysis, so people always go, "What multiple did you get?" That's only one part of the equation. It's like saying the Yankees scored 6 runs and they win or lose. Well, only if the other team scored 5 or less. And so I think it's, that there's, and remember, when you're dealing in, outside that, couple of $1 million, when you're dealing with 8 figures and 9-figure transactions and beyond, you're dealing with very, very sophisticated people on the other side. These people are not, they didn't get where they were being stupid. I mean, a few do, but, but not most of them. And so you've got to be well prepared. And I think that preparedness, not only with that, but it's also prepared, as Bill said, psychologically. Because how many deals, Bill, have we done where it was just sort of a game to them, and they knew emotionally the buyer had 1 foot out the door, and then they started to negotiate, even if the numbers didn't drop.
Yeah, blood in the water.
Yeah.
We got a question in the back.
Hi. Along the lines you're discussing preparing for sale a few years before the business, and particularly for the gentleman, it sounds like you have sold businesses that have been multi-generational or have had multiple stakeholders. I was wondering at what point you engaged your trusted estate group to discuss how that would affect the family.
You're asking for how do you? At what point do you get your trusted estates experts involved in terms of taking the proceeds of the transaction and
preparing for the transaction, so structuring different entities in advance of even engaging in these discussions and preparing for transferring.
I think I'm going to turn that over to Mark, but I think you'd be a good person to talk to about that. But I will say, the earlier the better. There are some certain things. If you really prepare a few years in advance, if you're that type of person and you're able to prepare in advance, there are certain trusts you can establish which really will protect upside. So if you, for example, can get a lower valuation, get the company into a trust, now that the amount that you exceed that lower valuation, when you got into the trust, is not subject to the kind of tax that it would be. There are many strategies that you can do, but let me let Mark talk a little bit about that.
I would say it's, as early as you can start, the better, because a lot of the gifting and other techniques won't work in contemplation of sale. If you already have an offer on the table, you can't take a discount, as an example. And so the earlier you start, the better. In fact, a lot of these transactions have to be well in advance, because the IRS is also sophisticated too in that marketplace as well, and they will come back and take a look at it. The other thing that I also think that is underlooked at, I think people look at their estate planning, but I think the other thing they also don't spend a lot of time looking at is asset protection. That ultimately, when you have this kind of wealth, that may likely also go to your next generation. The internet is pretty powerful in terms of people understanding how much money you have and where you live and what you've done. And there are people out there, bad people, trying to separate you and separate your family for the money. So I think an asset protection is just as important, or just as important as doing proper estate planning.
I just want to jump on that. My partner Steve Holt, who's sitting right there, can tell you a lot about this because he does this type of planning for our entrepreneurs, and it is critical that you do that planning in advance to maximize the ability not only for asset protection but for tax savings. There are a lot of sophisticated techniques you can use, and you want to do them before you go to market, before you have an offer, because without getting into the technical aspects of it, if you're already getting an offer and then you're trying to go back and create a tax saving strategy, if it ever gets looked at by the IRS, as Mark said, it'll be unwound and you'll have problems. But if you go and sit down and plan in advance, and sometimes it involves modifying your corporate structure a little bit, the savings could be material. We have a client right now where I think the savings on state capital gains is probably going to be about $5 million, but that was from advanced planning and setting up a lot of different corporate structure and trusts in advance.
Would you ever recommend an ESOP to your clients?
You want to answer that, Dave?
I've been doing accounting for 37 years, and I've heard about ESOPs. Somebody doing an ESOP every year for 37 years, and I've never seen one done. So, between the cost of it and it's got to be specific to a certain industry and a certain situation. I'm not a proponent of it.
Dave, I'm with you. It's something that gets studied a lot, and there's few of them that are done. But I think with the current tax environment, there's more of them being done. And I think it's generally, you've got to have the right circumstances in place, but it's also more times than not is so that the current owners can stay in control and be able to create some liquidity as opposed to having a true exit strategy. And so as I say, I in my career, I think I've probably done 100 studies, and I think we've done 3. Yeah, maybe 2.5.
And to do those studies, from what I understand, it can cost you $100,000, $150,000, $200,000 sometimes. There's a lot of out-of-pocket before you even know that it's worthwhile going that direction.
I have a question. I'm in the same business you're in, and one of the stumbling blocks that comes about very, very frequently in every transaction is working capital. So I'm curious, at what point in time do you initiate the conversation about what the working capital limit should be? Is that the closing table, or what point in time do you guys get involved?
Well, our NWC was, again, I was very naive to the whole process. And, I almost blew the whole deal because of that. And Courtney, my friend Courtney over there will tell you, her and Ibrahim were very instrumental in coming up with that number. And I was kind of taken back by it. I'm like, well, if you're buying my company for X dollars, I'm not leaving you nothing. Yeah, that's just the way I am. That's my money. I earned it in that year. Yeah, I earned it in that year, and that's not the way it works. And, I was very promptly explained how it does work. And again, not knowing about it, in this process for me, moving so quickly. I quickly learned about the NWC, and we were pretty spot on. Ibrahim and Courtney's numbers, what they did, I think I was off $100,000 from my NWC number, and what I left for capital versus when we did the true up, which was only done 2 months ago, we were only $100,000 off.
And I just want to, for the purpose of just explain to people what we're talking about here, in case you're not familiar with it. But generally speaking, with a transaction, the seller has to leave in a certain amount of working capital. Usually the seller gets to keep the cash in the company, unless there are deposits or something like that that have to be fulfilled. You keep the cash, and then you take an average of the last 12 months balances of, typically if it's an inventory business, inventory plus receivables, less payables. And you'll take a look at each 12 months and figure out, okay, that calculation came out to about $1.8 million. So therefore, that's going to be the benchmark. So this way, the seller can run their business the regular way they want to run the business, knowing that if the business has more working capital than the 1.8 million, they can take that off the table. But if less working capital, the buyer's not going to get shortchanged. So, yeah, no, it's a very, when we work with our clients, we really try to make them aware of as much as possible in advance as to what's going to be included and what's not going to be included. And working capital is, so no one wants to write a check for 8 million, 10 million, whatever it's going to be, and then know that they have to take money out of their pocket the next day to pay for regular operating expenses because the seller emptied the receivables, payables, and not leaving enough inventory, whatever it might be.
Let's see if that's all negotiated, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Generally,
the car. You can't take the engine out of the car. I agree. Too many firms don't address it early on, and they leave it, as maybe in your case, you were towards the tail end, and you were very emotional about it. So we included actually in our city, we let people know what exactly we expect the working capital to be. I don't know if you do the same.
I agree with that. I agree with just being upfront with people is important. At least let them know. You know, sometimes there is a little bit of a negotiation. We might not define it entirely, but we at least look to let our clients know what to likely expect.
Just to add to that a little bit, so I told you we do a lot of merger and acquisition. If somebody said, what's your specialty? It's working capital. And Sal, who's right there, is with me on all the working capital deals. But what I see in a lot of deals is the lawyers going through all the transactions, everything, and the last thing they put in is the working capital. I'm like, what are you doing? It's every time. Right? So the good news is, since this deal I kind of do my own deal, I kind of knew what working capital should be, but it's always the last thing. I agree with you.
We don't aim for the last thing, because if you do blow away,
Here's a question about
this is for Mark and David. As people who've gone through the sale process, what do you think, the best advice you can give to people who are thinking about going through this process, as well as, what predispositions did you have going into this process that were you kind of had to swallow your pride and something completely different?
So it's interesting because now I'm talking to prospective buyers, prospective sellers that are coming in under the umbrella. I always tell them, ask for what you want. Don't leave things. If you don't ask, you don't get. I told my kids when they were little, but it's the same thing as you're older. If you don't ask, you don't get. And hold your ground. And there's going to be ups and downs, and there's the roller coaster. Stay calm, stay cool, but ask for what you get and hold your ground. To me, that's what I try to tell people.
For me, I would mirror that as well, because I had lower offers. But for me, it was a matter of the right buyer. Like I said, I didn't want the company just flipped over 4 years from now. My statement to them, and this is how we hit it off, was I said, I want to be sitting on a beach in Florida drinking martinis and watch one of my trailers go by and making a delivery of food or whatever. And that's where the buyer and I kind of hit it off, because they had the same concept. So I would say for a seller looking for a buyer, there has to be, from my perspective anyway, a relationship. Because you are going to be working with these people to some degree, depending on what your deal is. I had to have some sort of relationship with them going forward, knowing that it was the right move. And so far it's been that way. I questioned, 2 months into the deal, I had to ask them a business question. And they said, Mark, is that what you've done for the last 20 years? I said, yes. And they said, then go ahead and do it. So right then and there, I knew they were the right people, and that's what I was hoping for. As far as what to expect, it's been said here already, preparedness, having the books in order, being an accountant is very helpful if you sell your accounting business. But I always shop from the hip. I have all the numbers in my head, and my accounting's there. I'm not saying we had no accounting by any means. I pay my taxes and everything else, but a lot of the projections were in my head. And I bought 2 new trucks because I knew this client would produce this much. It was never on spreadsheets. A buyer wants to know, and they want to see your trailing 12 months, and they want to see these things in numbers, not just from my head. So I would say putting those things down in paper before you have a buyer in front of you and being more prepared, and that way would be good advice.
I was just going to say one other thing. If you have a runway, and a runway of more than 3 or 4 years or longer, maybe you have 5 years or you have 7 or 10. One of the things is when you have, we're talking about EBITDA before, but sometimes there's different multiples depending on the size of the EBITDA. And I think one of the ways to grow your EBITDA the quickest and the fastest is by playing the merger acquisition game. So you're getting ready for sale, but the way to get ready for sale is by acquiring another company. And immediately through efficiencies and economies of scale, scaling your EBITDA so that when you then go to market 2, 3, 4, 5 years later, it's for a radically different number. And so oftentimes the best way to sell the business is to buy another business.
So as we've been going at about an hour now, we have 1 or 2 questions to go to wrap up before we network a little bit more. Anybody? Sir?
So the other end of the spectrum question that I had was, as opposed to this exit plan, succession planning, someone on the panel here talked a little bit about legal strategy / tax strategy, if in fact, you're really playing more on succession versus exit.
Do you repeat the question?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I understand the question. Do you mean?
The other side of the coin is if you're not looking to exit, but you're looking for a succession plan, say for your children.
Okay.
What are the things that are going to legal strategy for that, tax strategy for that, and so on and so forth? Talk a minute about that.
So, I think succession planning is kind of like a cursed thing for a lot of people, right? Because you have to be gifted with, if it's a family business, the next generation having the capability to continue with the business, and so sometimes that's the case, which is great. Other times you have to bring in outside people to create that succession plan, and layering in the next generation, not just at the top, but in all aspects of a business and a company to keep it going, is critical if it's going to survive. Because you see businesses die when they die with a particular generation, when the company gets old, when the ideas get stale. From a tax standpoint, there are creative strategies. There's valuation techniques, in terms of getting some discounts, possibly, that as you're valuing the business, you have to make decisions on whether, is this, you're trying to set up a sweat equity opportunity for the next generation, or do you need a liquidity event as the person at the top and you need to sell it, and how are you going to structure the sale? Are they going to get financing? Are you going to hold notes? I mean, there's a lot of things you can do, but I don't know if I'm giving you the full answer you're looking for, but.
I was going to say, one thing I believe is that if you have children, if this is about a family succession business, the question, you have to pay the children market. If the job's worth $100,000, you can't pay $350 because your daughter has a mortgage or your son has a mortgage that they have to pay. And a lot of times what messes up the transition is you got a heck of a business that can support 3 families, but you're feeding 5. And the other problem is when you start to pay people above market where they don't have that skill set in place, there's a lot of companies that guys like Steve can't sell because they can't replace the income for those families. You're keeping a business together just to keep the family in the house. And so I think a lot of the mistakes that you make is that sometimes trying to be too good to your kids, or trying to do that, to insist that just because they have your last name is often a mistake. Remember, only about I don't know the results I've heard, less than 10% of all businesses get to leverage and scale and go beyond that generation because they're making a lot of mistakes, and that's one. I can probably give you 100 of things, the do's and do not do's, to be able to make sure you have a successful business. Successful.
If I heard right, Mark, you were second generation, your father was involved, and you took it and you grew the business and then sold it.
Yes.
All right, so that's part of the succession plan.
Yep.
So that, you know, that's sort of what I'm alluding to, right? So either you're selling, or if you happen to think your kids are, have the capability, or you like them a little bit, and put them in a position to succeed.
Yeah, when I acquired it from my father, I was the only one that wanted the business. So my siblings, I have 3 other siblings. They did not want anything to do with the business. My children, I have 2 girls, both want in medical. They want nothing to do with trucking. To be honest with you, I'm happy about it. It's not an easy business. You know, a lot of long hours, a lot of, you know, weather. And so, yeah, for me, I don't have a 3rd generation to pass it on to. So the next best thing was, how do I transition out without having a garage sale, selling all the equipment, selling everything, and leaving my employees in the wind? Or do I find somebody to acquire me that will carry on a business for another 10, 20, 30 years? And that's why I made the decision to, you know, look for somebody to purchase us.
I just want to make a, before we do the next question, a very important public service announcement, which is the blue Ford Bronco is still blocking, now no one can exit the establishment. So if you have a blue Ford Bronco, 727 SBS, no one can leave the establishment until that is moved, because they didn't leave a key with the valet. So Anthony, get your car out of there.
Well, I would just say one more thing to your question. You should Google this. There's a very famous study called the Williams study, and it talks about that by the 2nd generation, 70% of affluent families lose the wealth, and by the 3rd generation, 90% lose the wealth, and that's of 3,200 families. And so we've spent a lot of time thinking, you know, deeply about what the do's and don'ts are to make sure that doesn't happen to your family, because I'm sure the 90% that lost everything by the 3rd generation didn't plan on losing. And it's pretty clear the things they did, what the 10% did right, what the 90% did wrong.
I just want to comment on something I think is important. It ties into one of the questions that were asked earlier as far as some of the mistakes that people make during a transaction. One very important area to concentrate on is it's very important to look at the big picture, the complete picture. Sometimes business owners in the emotion of the process may get tied up in one thing. What's that net working capital amount? What am I getting paid salary-wise? When they don't really look at it in a whole, in what it's doing for their lives from a lifestyle standpoint. What kind of cash are they going to be have in their bank accounts at closing that they didn't have? The stability, the financial security, things like that. And I can tell you, when we're recasting the numbers and presenting the numbers in the right way to help maximize value, one of the things we encourage our shareholders, our sellers to do is for us to normalize their salary as low as possible. Because if, let's say, someone's taking out $900,000, $1 million while working in the company, if we put in a $150,000 normalized salary, that's about $750,000 of additional money that we're showing as earnings. Now they get a multiple of these earnings. Let's say it's 5 times. That would be what? That's about $3,750,000 of extra value because of we weren't looking at how much am I going to get paid for 1 or 2 years following a closing. Yeah.
Found a willingness for companies to add look backs or something like that?
Oh yeah. Financials are prepared for tax purposes. That's the goal. The goal is to mitigate your tax liability. So one of the first things that we do is really make sure that we present the company in a way that where the financials really represent themselves accurately and including all the add backs, the one-time or non-recurring expenses. Let's say you had unusual consulting fee that was $60,000, $70,000 for the year. We want to add that back. Let's say there were one-time or non-recurring expenses, excess compensation, interest, depreciation. We make sure to add all of that back because we don't want the purchase price to be derived from what's being presented for tax purposes. We want it to be derived from what the real numbers are after making all these recasting adjustments.
Yeah, I was going to say that just to add on to what Stephen's saying, also when you make that fair market value adjustment to compensation, it becomes part of the earnings times the multiple. It's also a capital gains rate versus the income that you took, that income tax rate. So you not only win on the multiple, but you win on the tax piece as well.
So I'd like to conclude the question. Anybody want to take us over? those of you who might remember Jerry Springer, our producers chose him. Thank you for the work.
Fun fact about me too, Jerry Springer was a good family friend. So, question for marketing. I've recently heard that good companies aren't sold, good companies are bought. So more from an operator perspective, what in your mind make your companies a good company, right? It means not that it's going to have multiple buyers. So to be a good company, have multiple buyers in the door, getting a lens into your headset on an operating perspective, what makes your company a good company to buy?
So when the buyers come and look at our firm, now we're a service company, so it's a little different, but what they saw was different generations and different age groups, and they loved the fact that our younger partners were of great age, were smart, and could take it on and lead it after some of the older partners are gone. So in our case, what we had, forget the great processes and the earnings and the clientele and all those things. I think it was what they saw in the partner group that made it very attractive to them, especially the younger, smarter guys. I think they saw that and really honed in on that.
For me, I guess it was the growth that we've had over 10 years. It was just steady growth every year, year after year. And our customer base. That was actually a very sticky point. They wanted to talk to my customers before sale was done. It was another very rough point, because if the sale falls through, my customers now know that I'm looking to be acquired. But we have a very solid customer base, and our growth, solid growth for 10, 12 years straight was the key to make us, and our niche. We have a very unique niche in the delivery industry that we do. So I think those three things combined made us much more favorable to be looked at by these companies that want to buy us.
Steve, would the deal have gotten done if Mark still gotten done if he said no, can't interview the customers?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, first of all, customer due diligence is always a very sensitive topic. And so one of the things it really shouldn't be necessary if you have a company where you have 300 customers and no one customer is worth more than 7-8%, whatever it is of the revenue, that's a whole different story. But the issue is, especially when you have that one customer that's 35% of your revenue, that next one is 25%, two customers are 60% of your revenue collectively, it's natural that the buyer wants to understand that the relationship is in a good place. So a couple of things that we do is we look to make it as late in the process as possible, sometimes even after contracts are negotiated. We also will have, we'll know exactly how they want to approach it. Like, hey, we want to make an investment in this company. We really want them to continue to grow. We just want to know that you guys are on board. So we'll talk about the dialogue. And many times the seller will even be on the phone while the buyer's having that conversation. So it's a very sensitive topic, but we know how to deal with that topic the best we can. But it is a necessary evil, especially when it's concentration.
So with that, I just want to thank everyone tonight for coming out. I hope that you got a lot out of it. Thank you. And thanks to our panel. It's always great every year. We always have two new business owners who just did a transaction in the last year. So every year, it's always hear the interesting stories. So we thank everyone. Please stick around. There's still food, dessert, have a cocktail, network, mingle. So thank you again for coming.